is the FRC Roundtable, coming to you all the way from Minnesota. Your host team 2052 Nightcrawler presents this weekly FRC gathering where FIRST Robotics competition teams take cooperation off the field. Share your knowledge, give and get advice, solve a challenge, or celebrate what makes your team special. 3, 2, 1, go!
All right, the recording has been started. Welcome, everyone. It's so great to see so many people on the call tonight. Just a couple of house-cleaning things. One is that we have no available spots for sessions between now and week 0. It's so exciting. I'm so happy. Thank you for everyone who signed up to host a talk. Our dance card is full through week 0. I did take February 9th off. That's the Super Bowl. So I didn't know what our attendance would be. I decided I would just take off the 9th, given that it's the Super Bowl on the 9th. Another piece that it was part of the email that I sent out. These calls, especially when we have smaller attendance, mentors do a lot of talking. I'm so excited about how full this room is tonight. I want to make sure that we leave space for the students to participate. I know as mentors, and I'm very, very guilty of this, of just jumping in and offering my 2 cents, but I'd love to have as much student participation as we can have tonight. And then finally, if you're willing to turn your camera on when you're talking, it would be really great. It's always nice when I go to a competition and I run into either a student or a mentor that I know because I've met them on the Sunday night call. So if you're comfortable having your camera on, we really appreciate it. All right, with that, tonight's call is going to be hosted by Afomia Messon. Afomia, I know that you were in here. Oh, there you are. So Afomia is on the team on Nightcrawler. I will let her introduce herself, and she's going to facilitate our conversation tonight.
Hi. Okay, can everyone hear me? Because I have to switch to my phone. My laptop microphone doesn't work. Okay. I'm Afomia. I'm on Team 2052 Nightcrawler. This is my second year on the team, and right now in the Autonomous League. And there's a lot to talk about today, but I kind of wanted to start talking about with optimal scoring strategies and what people are considering about scoring either of the game elements and where they're scoring. Do any other teams want to hop in and talk about what they think about the scoring or the points this year?
I can start. I'm Dominic from 2491 No Mythic. I'm the Impact Captain and also leading our strategy task force this year, which is new for us. And I think one of the biggest things that we saw that perhaps other people didn't necessarily see is that as the processor is used more, the likelihood of the human player getting the algae into the net decreases. And so if you overwhelm the opposing human player with algae, the likelihood that they scored into the net gets lower and lower. So then that is the most efficient way of getting points at that point, thinking about 6 points per cycle. Even L4 Coral only gets 5 in Teleop. So thinking about if you want to get a lot of algae in the processor, it means that you should probably end up counting it as 6 rather than just a net score of 2. And thinking about specialization in that aspect. When we did our robot paper game simulation, we found that doing a mixed cycler didn't work very well in terms of trying to do both coral and algae at the same time. But I think that might have just been a limitation of the simulation.
Do you think that, building on, oh, sorry. Someone else talking? Nope. Okay. I was going to build on what you said about specialization. Do you think that specializing with one game element would help you, would maybe make more sense for teams at competitions? Or do you think that would give you an upper hand? Or is there any way that would make more sense to have either two mechanisms or a way to interact with both elements?
I know for us, we are sort of hoping to do coral specialization with the ability to do algae, especially being able to remove algae the from the reef and being able to at least get two into the processor for cooperation. Because that was our downfall last year, that we didn't get the cooperation points, and that meant that the tiebreaker for ranking did not go in our favor. And so thinking about sort of that as thinking about that, but I think the majority of our scoring will be from coral, given the fact that there's just significantly more coral opportunity and it's faster to score coral.
Is your team or are other teams thinking about trying to score algae in the net rather than just in the processor because of the net 2 points versus net as in like 6 minus 4, not in the actual net, versus getting 4 for sure if you score with your robot?
I'm from team 3277. I've listened to some other groups like the Fun Network and what they talked about, and to me it looks like scoring directly into the net just doesn't seem like it's worth it. It's like, I mean, trying to shoot those big yoga balls is going to take up a really big component of your robot when you can drag them over to the processor, and if you get enough in the processor, like No Mythic was talking about, you can start to gain a lot of net value off of that if they can't get it back up in that barge.
That's true. Another strategy I saw, building off of what No Mythic said about kind of overwhelming the human player, is kind of gathering the algae and then trying to score them all in the processor at the end, and kind of overloading the processor so that the human player doesn't have enough time to put them all up. And that also gives you a lot of end game points that aren't really end game points, but you're just scoring them really quickly. For No Mythic, since you're talking about specializing in scoring coral, is there a level that you think you're going to prioritize more than others, or are you going to try to cover all of them?
We were discussing that today. We were theorizing that we would probably use a very similar mechanism for levels 2 through 4. And then we were sort of like, well, if we just sort of intentionally miss a level 2, the coral would probably fall down to the trough. And so with further testing, we'll probably end up mostly scoring on level 4, as that's where the most points. I'm thinking back to Charged Up, where everyone was scoring on the highest level, and thinking about that's probably where the majority of the scoring is going to happen. But with the coral rank point, I think that it'll be an interesting mix of all 4 different levels, and especially with the kitbot only being able to score on level 1.
I'm seeing some comments in the chat about the different algae balls. I just saw that this morning, but are teams thinking about how to get around that yet, or have any other teams noticed that difference? I don't know if we've actually went through our kitbot algae, but I saw the Cheap Delphi post. I think another thing we were talking about is, because there's so much coral, is it going to overload the field or in any areas that we think there's going to be a lot of robot traffic, particularly out of the human player, the area where you're getting the actual coral. What was it called? A coral. I don't remember what it's called. Your coral station. For building off of that, what are teams thinking about ground intake versus human player intake for coral? I know we talked about human player intake possibly being able to score in the trough if it's some sort of a particular shape would probably allow it to pick it up from the trough as well as score, pick it up from the coral station and score it in the trough. But you could also build a different mechanism that maybe goes from human player to L1 through L4. But what are teams thinking about in terms of pickup for coral?
I'm Paul from Team 2502, Talon Robotics. One of our major designs is simply having a ramp with active wheels at the bottom that we'll be able to pick up coral from a human player station. This will all be mounted on an elevator, and we'll be able to score L2 through 4 very easily. And with slight adaptation, we should be able to score within the L1.
Yeah, I mean, with the coral scoring, what it immediately made me think of was the corn from Coin Conundrum. They are pretty similar shapes. And so like thinking about like how does that work? Paul, your design made me think back to what Nightcrawler did with the elevator with the star wheels. And I wasn't there for prototyping today, but I think that a similar mechanism, thinking about some sort of elevator, we just got a bunch of new elevator parts over winter break, which was really lucky of us. And so we're probably going to end up doing some sort of elevator design as well.
From Team 3277, we've been looking into doing an elevator, and we've thought, picking off the ground allows you to have your human player throw a bunch of coral down the ground, and it's with there only being able to have one defense bot that basically stops any kind of defense on you. But we've also looked at, since there is 2 substations, even if there's one defense bot cutting off one substation, you're still able to get into other substations. So being able to pick up from the human player seems like the best way to do it, because it seems like it's gonna be faster and easier to pick up from the station and drop and get really fast cycles like that.
I agree with that. Simon's got their hand raised.
You can go quick.
Oh, I was going to talk about a different topic, so you should go.
Has anyone thought about having 2 manipulators because the 2 different game pieces are 2 different sizes? Because that, unless you're doing some clamp that can clamp onto both of them, because the ball you have to shoot up into the net or put into the processor, which the processor's low and the net is really high, so it's kind of difficult to get it in there. So you got to pick one or the other, or just have a way to bring it to all the levels. And it's really big, and I don't think you can shoot the coral. Actually, you can't. Oh shoot, something happened. Okay. Can you hear me? Oh.
Sorry, I was going to say, I think you can shoot the coral if you're in your reef zone, but I saw some discussions about whether that's something that teams would even attempt to do, or where they would try to kind of shoot their coral.
Yeah.
I anticipate it's going to be something similar to 2023, where some teams do it. I remember like Emperors did a cube shooting, and I think Gears also did a cube shooting robot, but I don't anticipate most teams going for it. I mean, shooting PVC pipe seems a little bit dangerous compared to inflatable cubes.
Binary Battalion shot traffic cones that year, and we're pretty good at it. If anyone's going to do it, I bet they'll do it.
So I also had a question to go off of Simon. We're both on Team 2530 Inconceivable, and my question is, like, with the having 2 different manipulators, thinking back to 2023, a lot of people did, several people had like the dual manipulator that could do everything because they were similar sizes. And I'm just wondering about any other teams thinking about doing a manipulator that can do both together.
At 2530, can I ask if your team had any ideas of if they would use the same kind of clamping intake mechanism that would work for both, or did you have ideas for whether that would be feasible?
So for our current most fleshed out design, we have a separate coral and algae manipulator that are both on the same elevator.
Yeah, the thought was that if we have two separate mechanisms for algae and coral, they can share the same core elevator mechanism, but that also gives us utility for stuff like in auto if we ever needed to remove algae, if we wanted to pick up all the pipe and configuration during auto, all sorts of different things like that. It just allows more versatility by kind of using the rule that you're allowed to have one of each at the same time.
I have a question about your design. Did you plan on placing the algae on top of the bridge with that elevator? Or what is the max height that your elevator might reach?
We don't really have any current plans for placing algae on top of the net, aside from maybe shooting in the future, which I know is really probably going to be a nightmare. We haven't really considered the net as a scoring opportunity.
All right, thank you.
Earlier in the conversation, we started talking about defense and getting around defense, kind of flipping that onto the other side. Do teams think it's worth it this year to do defense? Because there's a lot of rules that kind of seem very anti-defense. Like there's only a 3-second pin count this year instead of 5. It would also be pretty difficult to look through the reefs from the other side of the field. And you can only have one defense robot on the other side, which is beneficial if the other alliance tries to do defense. Because like Briley was saying, you can just go to the other coral station. But do teams think there is a strategy that would give you an advantage in terms of defense?
I feel like your real strategy for defense is honestly having a really low drivetrain and just being able to push people. Because there's no safety zone in the coral pickup, you're allowed to push people around there and mess with their intakes and mess with them being able to pick up coral. And that's kind of the best way to play defense. Now, do you try to stay at just one substation and force all the traffic to go to one side, or do you try to bounce back and forth as a strategy that I think will develop as the weeks go on and kind of see deeper into that?
Do you think having a robot on your alliance trying to do that over trying to cycle either coral or algae is better?
I feel like personally, I think it'd be faster cycle times and not worrying about trying to play defense unless you have a partner that you know and they've proven that they can really play defense and it can be helpful for an alliance would be the way to go.
Simon's been raising their hand for a while.
I don't really think defense is very good unless you have opponents that are very weak to it. Like, I'm new to the team, but I heard we had a good arm, but we couldn't clamp onto pieces very well with it. Like, people would just bump us and the piece would come right out. I think this was during Sophie can take over. She knows more.
Oh, yeah. So what he's talking about is back in Charged Up, 2023. We had our gripper wasn't very strong, and we weren't able to keep possession of our game pieces. Like the moment we got hit, we drop. So that's like something I think our team's trying to keep in mind, to just like able to keep possession of those game pieces. So if defense does happen, we like don't have to like drop and re-pick up, because like that's a waste of time.
Scott, what were you going to say?
I just noticed something that I had not heard before, and I didn't notice until now, but there's no safe zone in front of the processor. So if you're up against a team that's processing algae like crazy, it looks to me like you can just park in front of that thing and they won't be able to process algae anymore. Does anyone else agree with that, or think that isn't a valid option?
I was actually just thinking the same thing, Scott.
I think the only concern I could see with that is that you could easily be pushed into the opposing barge zone.
But that's not a penalty. You can't force another robot to make a penalty.
But if your robot is parked in front of the processor, and the opposing robot comes into your side and hits you into the barge, so,
I don't think that's you can't push somebody into a safe zone to force them to incur a penalty. I don't.
Okay.
I mean, maybe so. Do we have any referees or any people that are on the field?
They can still shoot the algae, though.
Now, actually, on the same time, you're handicapping yourself if you have a good human player that can get it up into the barge.
Yeah, touching on that drawing penalty thing, it's kind of a gray zone. Thinking about last year, the safety zone in the source, it's kind of like depending on how close you are. Like if a robot has, it's maybe a foot away and you come in, you're bumping them into that safety zone. I've seen refs call penalty on that. But now if you're like very clearly shoving a robot and they have no way to get out of your way and resist it, then they won't call a penalty on that. And I've seen both ends of that.
I'd estimate that the algae is probably going to be focused on early game, clearing out the reef so that you can leave room for coral, and that a lot of teams will kind of start out with that and then pivot onto doing coral for a lot of their cycles. I feel like you can achieve a lot faster points just cycling those as fast as possible, and that it would be pretty easy if a team just kind of parked defensively against the collector to just pivot over to that faster if you needed to. Would be kind of my take.
Yeah, I agree with that. At the beginning of the game, at least, it seems like you'd want to have robots that can do L4 or just really fast cycle L1, or you'd need some robot that can take off the algae from the reef. I think regardless, you'd need some robot that is able to remove those, because of even if you have co-op, it's 3 levels with 3 coral, but there's a certain
3
number.
levels with 5, but even with the algae in the reef, you have 6 open spots on L4 and 6 open spots on L2. So without removing algae, you can technically get the linking point with co-op, but I don't see how you would get the co-op bonus without removing the algae from the reef, because unless you're a robot, unless one of your alliance partners is a robot that'll take the algae from the floor, which is possible, but I don't necessarily see likely.
So do you think ground intake of algae is not something that we're going to see? Or at
I
least
think we're going to see it, but I don't think it's going to be a main focus, especially in early game. I think a lot of algae bots will be able to get the algae off of the reef. But then I definitely think a good algae bot will have a floor intake and being recycling the algae that the human players are missing from the nets from the floor.
Oh, we had a comment about the barge penalty. I think the barge, I think more so it said don't contact an opponent robot inside the barge. But I don't know if you'd get the penalty like we were talking about earlier for just crossing into it, or the danger of doing that if you were protecting at the processor.
My only point on that is going back to the LG processor. In the past, we've seen penalties come up if you're in a protected zone and touch an opposing robot outside of that protected zone. That's all I was trying to point out.
Another strategy topic. Oh, Simon.
The end game with the climbing, it's from what we discussed, it's very beneficial to be able to do the deep cage because you're able to, you can do the deep cage and then for a ranking point, just one more teammate needs to park. That's one ranking point. It's pretty good. But the deep cage is also just 12 points flat, which is enormous from what I can see. Especially, it's just really nice to have one robot scoring all the way until the end of the game and not having to worry about, we need 2 people to do shallow and 1 person to park to get the ranking points still. It's just really nice, especially if 2 people can do shallow, it's very good. 2 people do shallow and 1 person parks. It's, you also get the ranking point in that case, but 1 person, all 3 people have to go climb and 1 person parks, or 3 people do shallow, it's 18 points. Still ranking point. It's nice, works. Not as well as deep though. But deep is also very difficult because you only have 3.5 inches to work with floor in the bottom of the cage, and you can't latch on to the top of the cage, so it's very difficult. But it's very worth it too. Somebody else can go now. I've talked a lot.
Talking on hanging on the cages, we looked through the rules, and I'm curious if anybody else has seen a rule about magnets. I've never seen a bot that had a magnet on it, and so we're curious if magnets are legal or if they're not legal.
I think magnets are legal from what I saw, but my concern, and the expert in the room can say something, is if you have 2-3 robots using magnets, would that cause any possible interference to the field electronics? Because when people start seeing it being effective, and everyone starts to onboard magnets on our robots, just something to think about.
I think I also saw on Chief Delphi that it might be difficult to purchase a strong enough magnet. Quite a few of those electronic magnets are more than $600, and so thinking about where you would purchase one.
You are also limited to 20 amps for a electromagnet.
One of the things that we talked about in 2530 that we haven't really fleshed out yet was possibly using magnets to align the cage if it's swinging. to just grab onto the cage, not necessarily for climb and having a completely separate climbing mechanism, but just so that we can handle the cage and make sure that we're actually able to do it in a reasonable time.
Yeah, that was one of my thoughts too, is that magnets might really work for kind of getting it into your grabber. So if it's swinging, the magnet can kind of grab it. Jeremiah, go back to your initial question about interference. I'm pretty sure the only scoring sensor on the field is the processor. Everything else, I think, is scored by humans. So I don't think there's much of a chance for interference.
The other thing about the low cage that I thought about, would it, the buddy system, would that be something that a robot can have an ability to have something on their robot pass it through the deep cage, and then that other robot, I don't know. I've seen teams doing crazy things when I look at past years robots. What do you guys think?
I think it's very much possible. I think the wording that they use to allow buddy climb is to qualify for points, you need to be in contact with another robot that is qualified for cage points. So I think that explicitly allows buddy climbing, but for deep cage, it's going to be a real struggle, especially with center of gravity and making sure that you can stay proper.
Each robot also does have to contact the cage for cage points. So that might make buddy climbs difficult.
Another risk with buddy climbs is that you're not considered climbed if you're touching the ground at all, whether it's transitively or just your robot. So if the buddy climb doesn't go well, or some part of the other robot's touching the ground, you wouldn't get any of your points.
I have a question. So, is that a penalty if a robot were to during the and pardon me if they went over this, I just haven't had much time to go through this weekend. If you had a robot that had augmented pieces that will interfere with the other teams being able to easily climb, you just go on inside and just position yourself in a way that it'll mix them, or you shake the cages and just create a hosted nightmare for them to easily climb. Would that be a problematic? No.
Touching the other alliance's cages is penalized.
They changed the wording from tech foul to major foul, so it's a major no.
Yeah, that's a good point for your own cages, but just overall, you cannot come in contact with your opponent, opposing alliance's cages.
One quick note on magnets from the discussion a minute ago, before that topic is just lost to time. Steel pipe is usually 304 or 316, which is typically not magnetic. So once someone buys a cage kit, it's probably a good idea to check how well that works and maybe post about it.
The other thing to think about with that is your gyros, how it will affect your gyro.
That's a great point. Yep.
Speaking of gyros, I think one thing that we definitely noticed was how many April tags were on the field. 22. How much automation are people expecting to see this year? We're hoping for quite a bit, given the limited amount of defense that can be played.
Yeah, it would seem to me that it would be pretty likely a lot of teams will end up having automation for I'm a mentor for 7850. I was recommending to our main programmer that he implements something along the lines of press a button and it auto aligns to an April tag every single time you want to score on the reef.
Yeah, I think Honestly, you take your driver stations, just make them all just one button. We'll just have our programmers do everything. You just press the button and we'll just know what to do.
Find the nearest April tag and perform whatever task. I think
it'll probably be key on the back side of the reef because vision's going to be very impeded. So you're going to definitely want to use it for alignment on that side. And you have to have 5 per level to get that ranking point.
Yeah, we were definitely thinking some sort of button board or tablet or so, and thinking like they already labeled all of the different reef points for us. So it would be A4, B3, F2, right? Thinking about all the different parts of the reef.
Yeah, we on 2530 were thinking of also doing a button panel similar to how many teams did in 2023 for selecting cone and cube placement. I'm wondering what other people are thinking about identifying which pieces have already been scored and working between your alliance on how to determine where to place things.
I think that's going to be a lot of in-game conversation, probably between coaches, especially because it might be unpredictable. The cycle times or where people are picking up their coral. Even if you start off with an original strategy of like, okay, this robot's going to try to fill up L2 and this robot's going to go for L4. I feel like a lot of that is just going to be seeing what gets filled up in the time that you have on or left.
I guess I have another question in that regard. How are teams and drive teams specifically identifying each piece on the reef? Are you using like the field management system of letters A through L, or are you numbering them, coordinate directions? How are you identifying what's what? If you got that far.
I don't know if we've had a major conversation about that yet, but I feel like in general it would probably be good to keep referring them to the official names and letters, especially because then when interacting with other teams, you could kind of refer to them with the same name, assuming that everyone's getting those. But there might be like a better strategy people think of for auto or for things like that make more sense within their team.
I also know that at least I saw one Chief Delphi post which was using vision to identify which pegs had coral on them. I don't know if that's necessarily going to be happening in Minnesota, but I think our programming team is probably going to try it, knowing them. And so thinking about increasing automation even then, thinking about how we can coordinate with alliance partners, trying to have the robot able to identify where it can place rather than relying on humans for that.
And that would be really helpful on the other side of the reef as well. Not trying to find the right moment to place it just on the reef, but figuring out where it makes the most sense to place it. Going back to what we were talking about with drive team and communicating between drive teams, what do people think about the skill required to be human player? Are people changing their requirements to be human player or to sign up to be human player this year in their drive teams?
It's sort of out there, but we were thinking some sort of stilts or platform shoes. I mean, it's only 8 feet tall, so if you have a 6-foot human player, that's not that difficult. And so that's what we were thinking. Like one of our teammates got one of these nice purple sparkly cowboy boots. So we were thinking something like that.
Okay, so you're gonna maximize everybody's height on the other side of the people. Okay.
I have a general question about human players as well. What are other teams thinking about wanting their human player on, the source coral feeding station versus on the processor? Because I know that with the 2 orientations and also maybe the variety of different coral intake systems, what do you think about having your human player on intake versus processor.
I feel like depending on where you like, the person you want in the processor is someone you want to be pretty good at being able to score, because going from the other team netting only 2 points to them now netting 6 points from every algae they score, if your human player is missing them on the processor, can rack up really fast. So you want to make sure that of the 3 teams on your alliance, that you have the strongest human player on that processor for who can score them up in that net.
We are going to be definitely focusing to try to get our human player at the coral station. Though I don't think our robot is really going to have difficulty with other people loading it. It'll probably be just slightly so faster that if we have one of our own teammates loading it.
I think an interesting thing will be an autonomous, thinking about that will require really precise timing. Thinking about, when do you drop the coral? Because the human player can load the robots during autonomous, which is new. And so thinking about if you have a really strong autonomous program, you might want to have your human player at the coral station just so that they can make sure that they're doing the timing right. However, I think that also then points to that it would be really nice to get a sensor on that intake to be able to have your robot wait at the coral station until they know that they have a coral in autonomous before leaving.
Another thing with autonomous, depending on how much you can score on the different levels of the reef, it might actually not be worth it to score during autonomous because the points are down. Because on L4 branch during auto, I got it mixed up. Oops. Bye. Pretend that never happened.
Well, Simon, I'll pile on top of that. I will share that I'm fairly disappointed with the autonomous scoring this year. FIRST is not incentivizing teams to be awesome at auto, and I think that's really unfortunate for our programmers. It's just not advantageous to be an excellent auto team. And I also am very disappointed that in order to get your autonomous ranking point, every robot has to move off the line, and that almost never happens at week 1. And so I'm very disappointed about that too. Is that, personally, my philosophy is that ranking points should be possible if all your robots are pretty good. They should also be possible if 1 or 2 of your robots are awesome. And this is not the situation for this auto. If you have 1 robot that doesn't move, you cannot get the autonomous ranking point, no matter how good your other 2 robots are. I'm disappointed by that. But I agree with you. I think what you were going for, Simon, and maybe you misspoke, maybe you didn't, but I also agree that autonomous isn't worth enough points for scoring in auto compared to scoring in teleop. I think that's unfortunate as well.
One thing I have seen though from Team Rembrandt's is that they're at least they're planning autos to just nudge allied robots off the line. Thinking about if they don't have an autonomous that can move, their robot can move it for them. It could be one way of having, if you have 2 good robots that have an autonomous, you can have 1 robot nudge the other robot that doesn't have an autonomous, and you can have the 3rd robot score the coral. That would be one way of doing it.
We did that in 2020, but do you just have to move off the line, or do you have to move into your play zone?
You just need to leave the line, is my understanding of it.
Yeah, then we will definitely be doing another bump auto like we did in 2020. And for all the teams that are planning to do good autos, definitely build yourself a bump auto.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that's something that we saw a lot in 2018 as well, when that was a similar auto rule.
From what I heard about that rule, and I thought was kind of interesting, is it kind of helps to encourage teams to collude with your future alliance partners. Hey, do you have an auto that works, and if you don't, how can we help you get something that works? And kind of collusion during the tournament there, which can be difficult, but it does help in that aspect. Or if your robot's broken, hey, how can we help you get up before this match so we can at least try to get this ranking point?
There is one word added into that I think is huge. It says every enabled robot has to move off the line. So if you have a robot that's not going to work at all, it doesn't have to move off the line if it's not enabled.
That's a question that I had was, could you just stop on the line? And does that count as not enabled? I don't know all of the rules surrounding that.
That's a good Q&A question. I did notice that too, David, but I was thinking at it from the point of view of a robot just can't get on the field. They're broken. That you got a 2-on-3 situation. Now the two robots could still get the autonomous point because your third robot didn't show up. But my assumption is if they're on the field and light's blinking or has been blinking, maybe. But that's a great Q&A question, Dominic. I would encourage you to submit that.
Reading from the rules, it says autonomous stop button, located on the right side of the driver's station itself, is used to disable a robot during auto. That does say to me that it's disabling it. So it seems likely that would actually be a decent strategy if you want to guarantee that auto point. Another auto question. The algae in the reef, are those randomized at the start of the match, or are those going to be in the same spot?
Those will be in the same spot.
Okay.
And they alternate between L2 and L3. Essentially, you couldn't score L3 without removing them.
We've had someone raising their hand for a while. The name says Doctor on my screen. No?
Dr. B, get your hand up.
Dr. B, I don't think your mic's working.
Oh yeah, they are unmuted right now.
Yeah, he's one of our mentors, so.
Yes, hello. Our team has never used a linear elevator before, so we're wondering what off-the-shelf parts or what DIY solutions there are to making an elevator, because elevators are seen to be pivotal this year.
I'm in programming, so I wouldn't.
And we also haven't. Oops, sorry.
Oh, my bad.
I was just gonna say that we also haven't used an elevator in recent years. 2530, and we've in the off season into getting more elevator stuff. Some of the options we've looked at is there's West Coast Products has elevators, of course. Rev they have released a new elevator kit this year as well that allows for like a nice low profile sliding elevator. And we ended up with Swerve Drive Specialties elevator bearing blocks as well, which are also kind of a newish thing. And also Thrifty Bot has a lot of good elevator options. So I think most of those are in stock still. So there should be a lot of good off-the-shelf elevator options this year.
Yep, and go through and familiarize yourself with the instruction manual when buying, just to make sure you're buying all the components that are necessary to do the full elevator. A lot of times you can get the bearing blocks separately from the rigging stuff, so make sure it's a deep dive sometimes, just looking at that documentation and try to understand how it all goes together. But a lot of components, but I definitely recommend when it comes to the bearing blocks, making a purchase of a COTS item versus trying to make those yourself.
I know 2052 just 2 years ago for 2023 used an elevator. Scott, do you want to talk a little bit about that? I don't remember what you used.
I'll let Nate talk about that. Nate's one of our primary build mentors.
Yeah, so we used, I think it's one of the kits from Andy Mark. I forget which one. I think they actually have some newer ones out since then. But I think the Swerve Drive has a new one that looks nice as well, that really uses clamping with some blocks that go inside your extruded aluminum. Ours required more of where you cut the aluminum and apply gusset plates to the 4 pieces that make up each stage. And you'll want to do a good job of making sure that those are all the same length and square. And then you rivet those together. Whereas some of it looks like the Swerve Drive is just more like bolts together, which may be more convenient. We then used a lot of different ways to rig an elevator. You can do continuous or cascade. We've done cascade more recently, since you can drive the first stage with a chain, and really then the next stage or the carriage is then pulled up or driven with some cord, based upon how it's affixed to the other stage. So that's what we've used in the past, but there's a lot of different options. There's some good videos on YouTube from some teams on elevators. So yeah, I mean, this game with all 3 or each level being in a line kind of is making sense to elevator versus an arm, but definitely do your homework. But right, I would recommend sooner than later ordering elevator parts if that's what you're looking to do.
Speaking of ordering stuff, I guess I was wondering about like game pieces. How are everyone doing on like manufacturing those? And did people get their cage orders in soon enough? I think I saw somewhere that they sold out in 4 hours.
So most of our game pieces we actually made ourselves. The piping, that's very easy. And then we have a connection that someone on our team is able to weld. So we're actually building our own cage.
The amount of weight you can have has went down from 125 to 115 with the that's without bumpers and battery, but with them, because bumpers I think you can have at max like 20 pounds, and then a battery's like 10 pounds around there.
The 135 weight limit is without batteries.
Huh. Yeah, 135. That's why I'm saying bumpers are like 20 pounds. But without battery, with those, you can probably only get to about like 140 something. So stuff still gonna break off if it's not secured properly. So just to keep that in mind with weight budgets.
Kind of continuing with that bumper weight thing, we kind of discussed it a little bit. Is anybody else thinking about maybe trying to use limit for ballasting or keeping CG low?
I think you cut out a little bit there. Can you say your question again? I think.
Oh, sorry. Is it better now? Okay, good. I was just wondering if anybody else has thought about using that 20 pounds that you can now really have for bumpers to kind of ballast the robot and try and keep the CG low with bumpers being kind of towards the base of the robot generally.
I think that's a valid strategy. In fact, the Fire Bears have been a team historically that made very heavy bumpers for specifically that reason over the years. And I want to point out too that bumpers aren't limited to 20 pounds. You can have 80-pound bumpers, but your total robot weight can't be more than 135. So that means you have a 55-pound robot without your bumpers and 80-pound bumpers. So you could go crazy with how heavy your bumpers are as long as they comply with all the other bumper rules that are on there. And I agree. I think it's a valid strategy. If you end up building a very tall robot, having a low center of gravity is definitely going to be advantageous.
Another thing about bumpers, we were discussing that the backing doesn't appear to have a height limit. Would that allow you to feasibly make a large board out of your bumpers that could be used to, say, shield electronics from certain game elements or other robots?
Yep. Your bumpers can be as tall as you want them to be this year. So you could have 3-foot tall bumpers attached to your robot going all the way around the robot if you wanted. I'm not sure why, but it certainly is legal this year. You just have to make sure that you have that bumper zone covered in bumpers.
You want those 3-foot bumpers to protect you from those big, heavy steel swinging cages.
R408 says the weight with bumpers can't exceed 135 pounds.
Yes, that's right. But you can take away your robot weight to get heavier bumpers.
Okay, I understand what you're saying.
Would it be cool to go back to auto questions? By the way, I'm not Dr. B. I'm Dr. B's significant other, also a mentor on the team.
She's coach, I'm mentor.
In any case, I'm wondering what I have 2-part questions. Are you thinking of going for your game pieces after the ones that are staged on the field, like the little ice cream cones with the ball on top and the PVC down below? Or are you thinking of going to the human player source? That's question 1. Question 2 kind of follows from that because I perceive chaos from the algae rolling around during auto and wondering what thoughts people have about that.
I think for us, we're probably going to go for getting from the human player station, given we're not requiring our design to be able to pick up coral from the floor. And it's probably going to be more, well, I don't know. I'm not a programmer, so I can't speak on consistency, but I think that we're probably going to go for the human player station, and that's what I anticipate many teams doing. Because, yeah, as you said, the algae will be rolling all around, and that seems chaotic.
As the programming lead for our team, my kind of plan in going into auto is it looks like we're not planning to do the ground pickup, kind of like No Mythic is. And it seems like picking up from the human substation will be more consistent anyways. And then as for aligning with the reef arms, thinking about using the April tag and then offsetting yourself on the either left or right side from there to line up on those. But that's just kind of our plans for it. I don't foresee the algae being a huge deal because although they are rolling around, although the algae is rolling around, like the coral could be because those are a little harder, but the algae, I feel like if you hit it with your robot, they're just kind of going to move out of your way, and I don't think they're going to affect robot paths very much.
With protecting your robot from the game pieces, like those balls, if you get hit by the algae or something, like you take it out of the reef, it falls on top of your robot. Something tells me that's not going to go well. Also with the coral, when you're getting it from the coral station, you'll also still have to catch it. If you have a good human player, that won't matter as much. But if that gets hit, if that gets stuck in your robot, this is not going to be a good time. So you have to think about, you got to think about protecting your robot from the game pieces, even though you're supposed to get the game pieces. And remember, you probably are going to have cameras on your robot, so you have to be careful by that. You also have to be careful that it doesn't knock your cameras off or something.
Yeah, adding on to the grabbing coral from the coral station and the accuracy of that, Looking at some Robot in 3 Days videos, it looks like those do bounce in very unpredictable directions if you do not grab them directly from the human player or let them drop. So missing one from the human player grabbing it may create some motivation to have more of those automated tasks, like lining up with vision and preparing your robot to receive the coral with vision. This is kind of going back pretty far in our discussion, but back when we were talking about having a pushing auto that would push robots off the line just to get the ranking point. And I saw Ben put a comment in the chat about how now that there's 6 ranking points, it might just be worth it to focus on the others. And building off of that, I was wondering what people were thinking about the ranking point situation this year, or in particular, if there's any that teams think they're going to prioritize getting over the others. Especially because there's so much more ranking points, each one is technically worth less. Like last year at very high level competition doing a trap was pretty helpful just because it was an in-game ranking point and there weren't that many of those compared to this year where there is a significant amount. So if you're not getting the auto one, you can focus on getting the barge one, etc. So yeah, I'm just wondering if people are thinking about ranking points or prioritizing any over the others. Simon or Luke, do you want to go?
Luke, you can go.
I was looking at a few of the ranking points. I think some of them, there will be some opportunities where you just can't get them, and some of them are kind of gimmies, like you will get them. For example, the autonomous one, I feel like that's pretty easy to get. That's what I was thinking. I think there's more of them, but they're not necessarily as difficult to get as they've been in the past.
With the Reefs ranking point of putting it on multiple different levels, 5 on each level, you probably want to start from the top to the bottom, but with the companion, with the friendship point, with putting 2 in the processor, making it easier to do the Reef one, and being better at tiebreakers, because those are tiebreaker points too. I think it's just a good idea to put 2 in the processor, even if you say if one person on your team can do the processor, I think it's a good idea for them to put 2 in the processor. So if the other team does it, you now have the friendship point, because it's now also beneficial for them to do the friendship point. So
yeah, I you said about the tiebreaker, especially this year because it's 3 ranking points for a win and only 1 for tie. It's a little bit more like proportionally detrimental to tie. So getting any of those points is a good idea. What's the other thing I was gonna say? But like No Mythic mentioned earlier, it's also probably a good idea to get the co-op because you can technically get all 3 levels without knocking off any algae from the reef, even though, again, that's kind of a strategy discussion of if you'd want them off anyway to score them in the processor. But yeah, I think doing co-op is going to be pretty important, helpful for everybody this year.
How many points we can get from the corals? Like, what do you mean by that how many points we can get by putting our corals on top and then to the bottom?
Do you mean like how many points for scoring the coral on each part of the reef?
I have the list open. I can answer that.
No, how can we how many points we'll get if we'll put on all of them?
Oh, if you put it on all of them? Do you mean for getting... Well, there's 1 ranking point that you can get if you have 5 or 3 for co-op on each of the levels. But it looks like in Teleop, on L4, you get 5 points, and then it's going down by 1 as you go down.
Yeah.
Is that your question?
Technically, there isn't a hard... I don't think there's a hard limit on L1 on how many you can actually place in there. It's more testing would have to be done on like how many you could cram onto each side.
You can also stack them, so
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we calculated it out earlier today, and it's somewhere around 120 or so, but that might be a low ball.
120 total points from the reef.
Yeah, from coral placed on the reef.
My math comes out to closer to 168
That sounds more right.
because you can get 12 on the top 3 levels, 12 times 3, and then roughly about 12 in the trough as well would put you around 170.
Well, theoretically, if you score on all 12 pegs of the upper 3 levels during auto, which is pretty much impossible, you get 204 points. So that's like probably an upper bound.
Thank you, Arden.
That'd be some really good autos.
Does anyone else have anything to add to that? If not, I have a topic I would like to talk about. What are people's thoughts about drop frames? We are considering dropping to a 1/2-inch clearance on the bottom of our robot to the ground because there's legitimately nothing on the floor. There's not a cable, there's no cable runs, there's nothing obstructions. So the lower we go, the better we're going to get for CG for endgame. And it's just, is there any reason not to? I want to see what other teams are thinking because we are most likely heavily considering it.
That topic has come up in our Slack channel for design group of ordering parts to do the drop frame or making them ourselves.
Yeah, we were looking at a chassis lowering kit, and I've seen a lot of conversations about that on Chief Delphi, especially just because your center of gravity will be lower. Might make it easier to climb on the cages. Also, in general, it would be harder to knock you over, especially if people are thinking about having a taller extension because of the no vertical extension limit.
Yeah, we were looking at some kits too. I think it came out to 30 a corner for swerve modules, and we just decided I think we're just going to machine them in-house if we do with some 80/20. Same thing, cheaper for us and probably quicker.
Yep, that's what we said too. It was 120 total for the lowering kit, which is kind of crazy.
I had an idea for climbing that I wanted to ask if other teams were considering, which was I noticed that in the animation for the shallow cage, they showed a robot kind of grabbing onto the bottom to lift it up, and that way the center of gravity wouldn't. It would be a little bit easier to kind of have a more balanced hold as opposed to kind of grabbing it from the side and having a lot of swinging. Have any other teams considered doing something similar on the deep one, where you kind of bring the cage into the center of a robot, maybe leave the center of your robot open, kind of like a donut, to get really good grab on all sides of it?
That is something that we considered very heavily. Day one was Donut Bot. And then we realized that a hole that big in the center of a robot really constrains everything else. And it's very hard to get CG right. And we are probably leaning away from it and looking for alternate solutions.
So we are still considering doing the donut bot. Also, I saw one thing: the Penn State, our RI3D team, actually did pull this off without the rest of the robot. So we're still considering it. It seems like a very cool idea and should help with the center of mass.
I was going to say, you only need to be off the ground. You don't need to be substantially off the ground.
I had a question considering autonomous function during teleop, or just strategy in general. Do you think that removing algae and placing coral in the same extension will be a strategy?
Yes, that's something we are anticipating doing.
Yeah, I've also seen multiple robot in 3 days designs where they have the same type of mechanism where they're able to score. One in particular, they had a kind of a notch where they were able to intake with a wheel the coral and also outtake it onto the actual pegs. And then at the same time, that was attached to a bigger wheeled kind of grabby claw contraption that could at the same time take off algae. So I think that's good, especially for like we were talking about, taking algae off of the reef might be considerably important later on. Also with packaging, that makes it easier if you are trying to put a hole in your robot.
How many points we can get with the algae?
Algae in the processor and is 6 points, and in the net it's 4 points, and it's the same for both autonomous and teleop. But you can also consider scoring in the processor as net 2 if you think that the human player will make it. So that's kind of where the trade-off is in terms of scoring algae. Jaredon's been raising their hand for a while. The last topic.
Sorry to go back, but for DonutBot, even if you get I have a question. If you have your robot perfectly balanced and you lift it up that 3.5 inches, if it tips during that 3 seconds and one wheel touches the ground, does that not count as a full climb?
I believe it's assessed at the end of the 3 seconds, yeah. So that would count. Or I can go back and check the wording again.
3 seconds or when robots have stopped moving. So like if you tip over and then you settle on the ground within the 3 seconds, you probably won't get the points.
It's similar to last year in terms of scoring.
Yeah. You want to go for DonutBot, one-way latches are just going to be your best friend. There's no way around that.
I have a comment on the cage. I'm going to use this cough drop wrapper as an example, but if you're planning to climb and you tilt the cage at a 45. I made an analog today out of wood and PVC so that our students can see just how big it is and stuff. And I was looking at the design, and that's only 1/8 inch plate steel on the top, and it's a gigantic, I don't know, 3/4 inch eye bolt that's going through that 1/8 inch steel. If we're putting 135 pounds on that eye bolt with the cage at this angle, that's going to seriously distort that top piece of sheet steel. And so I think it'll be interesting to see how much that changes, how high it is off the ground when that eye bolt starts twisting up the top plate, or if FIRST is going to do an update and say that they've reinforced the top of the cages. Because if people are, I did see I don't know, I think there was a Lego robot in 3 days Lego model where they tilted it to climb. If you put that kind of torque on that piece of 1/8 inch, I think that we're going to see that top piece twist, which is probably going to push the whole thing out of square as well. So it'll be interesting to see how well those cages hold up.
Can we like hold on the chains or something? Or we can only do it on the cages?
You can only hold on everywhere on the cage except for the top of the top plate and the chain / eye bolt.
What is the benefit of having 2 manipulators versus 1 manipulator with the ability to store stuff? Because I feel like 2 manipulators is better because you can manipulate both objects at the same time. Like you can say with the elevators being able, with what somebody came up with us is we have 2 manipulators on one thing. We talked about this earlier, but having 2 manipulators, I think, is just better unless you're able to, because you can control both objects at the same time. Being able to store stuff, I feel like, is pretty good too, but it's not as good as just being able to manipulate both objects at the same time.
if you have two manipulators, you have to take into account building both the manipulators and then where to place both manipulators. So it's the less of having both helps more. It's the how do we build and utilize both at the same time.
And program and stay underweight.
And deep cage. If you want to do that too with two manipulators, that's just a nightmare and a half.
Not to mention, what is your purpose of, I guess, holding two pieces at once? It seems to me like it would be fairly common that you're gonna be wanting, you're either gonna be bringing algae to the collector or coral to the reef. It seems like it'd be pretty easy to kind of just focus on one piece at a time and still get very efficient with your cycles.
I think one thing that at least I've seen is, first of all, the ability of people to hold two, given the fact that they got rid of the momentary ruling, that it's now contacting two game pieces rather than controlling. It means that you're not going to get a penalty for trying to place a coral and accidentally hitting an algae. But I also think that there will be some teams who grab a coral from the reef station or from the coral station, place it onto the reef, retrieve an algae, place it in the processor, and then go back to the coral station, and that be their cycle, which you could also see doing that with both a coral and an algae at the same time. I don't know exactly how that's all going to work, though.
I was thinking, while you're putting on the coral on the reef, and you grab an algae at the same time, obviously I think this would be a button on your controller rather than a human thing, because this just seems ridiculously hard. But it's faster, and faster in a 2 minutes and 30 seconds game is always good. That's why Swerve is so good, because you got to go fast. But being able to grab something while placing something at the same time is really good. If that's the only reason, it's okay, because I think is it 6 algae? Or how much algae is on the reef?
6.
6, all right. Being able to do that 6 times is really nice. Say you do it 6 times, which you probably won't, because you'll have probably an alliance member who can do it too. It's just nice, which is good.
Yeah, I mean, assuming that you still have the 6 that you started the game with once teleop starts, you could probably kind of split the reef in half if someone is doing those triangular cycles that Dominic was talking about, going from the coral station to the reef to the processor, although that is one side. But on the other side, you could do kind of the same, knocking off the algae and then going back to your coral station.
How many curls can we have, on our bot?
One of each game piece.
No, not from the start. How many we can get? How many pieces we can get on a robot?
You can only control one of each game piece at any given time.
You can have one of each. You can have one coral and one algae at a time. You can't have 2 coral at a time. You can't have 2 algae at a time. One of each.
Does it say anything about holding on the cage one time, or how many times we can hold on the cage?
Do you mean attempted climbs on the cage?
Yeah.
I think technically you could do it however many times you wanted, but other than end game, it wouldn't really make sense just because of the time that would be wasted. I'm sorry, am I understanding your question?
Yes.
with having 3 robots that can do deep, would it be beneficial at all to do 2 deep and 1 shallow to make movement through easier?
I think that it wouldn't necessarily be, due to the fact that, first of all, the cages are 4 feet apart from each other. And so if you have a little bit narrower bot, you're able to fit through with some precision. And also, at least our team is not anticipating crossing to the other side of the field. The only aspects that I could see where crossing to the other side of the field is helpful is defense and scoring into the opposing processor, and stealing algae. But our team is not anticipating going for algae as a real like scoring mechanism. We're probably going for algae mostly for co-op. And so we at least don't anticipate crossing over to the other side, and would not like to give up 6 points, which is the difference between a deep and a shallow climb.
Now, Dominic, you actually just brought up a good point that I never thought of, so I haven't looked up. Can you score into the opposite side processor?
I don't see a rule against it, and it's a sensor scoring it. And so the main reason that I see you would do that for is to force cooperation. Because unlike last year, the humans don't have any control over cooperation. And so I think at some people to force cooperation might do that. And it would allow for your human player to score into the net, but I don't really see why you would do that.
Yeah, when I was reading through the manual, I also saw nothing limiting scoring in the opposing processor. The reason that you would is cooperation, and you're giving them points, but if the cooperation, in your opinion, is worth it, then I did not see anything that limits that.
Since defense isn't really a big thing in this game, I would feel the most beneficial thing to do would just be points, because it's not beneficial to make a pure defense bot when only one person can be playing defense at a time, and you're facing 3 bots that can do points. They're very good at points, and you have 2 bots that can only do points because the other one is just good at defense and can maybe pick up coral or algae. But I don't really see a reason to make a pure defense bot or defense bot or specialize in defense at all.
I kind of disagree with you there. I think in terms of final alliances, I feel like it's going to be difficult having 2 robots scoring from the same coral station, especially with very fast, very good robots. I feel also that defense is going to have a pretty pronounced impact when at the end of the tournament, you can send 1 robot, which can significantly delay cycles because there's no protection at the coral. I also feel that, there's with such a short cycle space, you're able to crowd that zone a lot more and be able to delay more and more cycles versus last year, since the cycle was the entire map, you had plenty of time to avoid people, and I feel like there's not going to be any of that this year.
Is there any strategy in stealing opposing teams' algae? Not from the reef, but from the ground.
There's a limited amount of algae, so unless you're purely going for algae, that works. It's not the best thing ever, but it works technically.
You can't take it off the reef. You'd have to get it off the ground.
Actually, is it you can't take it off the reef? I thought you can't put algae back on the reef, but you can remove it from the opposing alliance reef. Is that correct?
I didn't see a rule saying you couldn't take it off of the opposing reef. I only saw something that you can't put it on the opposing reef. You also can't take coral off the opposing reef, but I feel like they would have included if they included rules about removing coral from the reef, but didn't include a rule about removing algae from the reef, I don't anticipate that.
I'm just gonna quote G411. Do not put algae on their reef. A robot may not deliberately put algae on their opponent's reef.
Mhm.
Resulting
Deliberately?
in a deliberately, which would result in a major foul or yellow card.
I mean, wouldn't it? I mean, going back to like taking it off the reef, off the opposing reef, wouldn't that kind of be like a really big risk? Because I mean, it's a safe zone for the other team, so going in there, they can just like go up to you and then you get penalized. So
Yep, especially because it doesn't matter who initiates contact. So if they see you over there trying to take an algae off, it takes one touch and you're already getting a penalty that you could have very easily avoided.
I was gonna say it's a safe zone, so yeah, thank you for pointing that out.
So, what if for defense, if an opponent alliance has a defending robot, do you think it would be better for you to go defend, if you were a defending robot, to go defend on their side, and you have both alliances have a defending robot on the other side, or would it be better for you to try to stick and try to prevent their defense robot from interfering with your alliance?
The main scoring zone for this is the reef. That's a safe zone, as mentioned earlier, for your side. So they couldn't do that much obstructing unless they're blocking the coral source, which is that a safe zone? I don't know. It's
No.
not. Or...
I think that also presents the challenge. First of all, you're tying up a robot that could be getting points in defending a defending robot. And then again, like we talked about earlier, because that's such a limited space, it might do more harm than good if you're having kind of two robots battling it out between the cycle zone. So that's also something you have to think about.
Yeah, that would, because now you have two robots obstructing your way through, because two robots are battling. The other two are scoring, but it might get in the way of you. So at that point, it might as well be you go to the other side. Because now it's 1 versus 2, 1 versus 2. Because of 2 scoring and 1 defending on each side. So I think that's kind of... If a robot's coming over to defend, you might as well go defend at that point.
I think that's an interesting scenario. I also think there's, because there's only one robot that can come over to defend, there's probably something else that robot could be doing, like processing algae or going to a different side to pick up coral off the ground, because there will probably be coral on the ground, whether from the trough or not.
I want to hop in here. It's 8:30. I'd like Sophie to be able to make her comment, and then if there's any kind of things that we want to wrap up with, I think that would be a good time to do that. So Sophie, you had your hand up. Can you?
Yeah. So I was just also gonna comment on what it seems like is it's not going to be a very defense heavy game, but when you are getting into those final matches, there is going to be a bit more, especially like at least like probably one robot might be defending, because of like if it's just scoring, a team probably will want to go over there and defend the human player stations to like avoid coral getting to the other team. Is just something to keep in mind, is towards later matches and like the second day of quals and like finals, there's probably going to be more defense.
Yeah, I think we've seen that in previous games as well. Leading up to higher level competition, teams start picking robots either specifically for defense, or that becomes a bigger part of their strategy, especially because it's going to be teams that are scoring more points in general. So anything that could lower that score on the opposing alliance side would be helpful.
I was going to say, I think this is an evolution that we saw in 2019, though that game was a lot more congested than this is. You saw that second round be almost always defensive bots. Later in the state, later as the game evolved, just because teams could pound out a lot on their own, and the defense was really worthwhile for at least inhibiting their top robot to some degree.
All right. Do we have any final comments or last minute questions anyone who wants to pop out before we wrap up? All right. I want to say a huge thank you to all the students on our call, and a huge thank you to Afomia for leading our conversation. Thank you very much, Afomia. I'd love to have everyone back next week, and especially all the students who are participating. You guys did an awesome job. Next week, we're going to continue this conversation, but instead of focusing on game strategy and what we kind of learned about how the game might be played, next week we can continue some of this stuff, but I think we'll be starting to talk more about robot-specific type things. I'm sure all of you will be doing prototyping this whole week, and we'll come back and we'll talk about what we learned about prototyping, how difficult it was to do this or that or whatever you may have found in the Robot in 3 Days videos that you really liked. So once again, thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing everyone again next week and all the weeks to come. All right, have a good night, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.
That's it for this week's FRC Roundtable. Join us live all season long, every Sunday night. Visit the website at team2052.com/roundtable to sign up for weekly invites. In the meantime, keep building, keep learning, and we'll see you next week.